Seelow Heights, Germany. Today, there's a museum here, on a ridge of low hills, 60 kilometers east of Berlin. Tourists walk through preserved trenches. They see rusted tanks left where they died. They read plaques about the great Soviet victory of April 1945. In the center of the museum stands a searchlight, massive, industrial, a relic from the battle. Next to it, a small placard, added in the 1990s, after the Soviet Union collapsed. The placard tells a different story than the museum around it. It says the searchlights failed, that they blinded Soviet troops instead of German defenders, that the brilliant plan turned into catastrophe. For 40 years, nobody knew this. For 40 years, the Soviet Union called it genius. The soldiers who fought here knew differently, but the soldiers didn't write the history books. This is the story of how institutional pride turns tactical victory into human catastrophe, and how the winners spend decades hiding the truth. April 16th, 1945. 3 days before this museum would become a graveyard, Marshal Georgy Zhukov stood at his command post on the eastern bank of the Oder River, the hero of Moscow, the savior of Stalingrad. Now he would deliver Berlin to Stalin. Behind him, 1 million Soviet soldiers waited in silence. 20,000 artillery pieces, 4,000 tanks. Ahead, across the river, the Seelow Heights rose 60 meters above the floodplain. German forces held those heights. Perhaps 80,000 men, old men, teenage boys, remnants of broken divisions. Zhukov wasn't worried. He had a secret weapon. At 5 o'clock a.m., the largest artillery barrage in human history would begin. Then, 143 searchlights would turn night into day. The plan was brilliant. The plan would fail spectacularly. But that truth wouldn't be admitted for 50 years. April 16th, 1945, 3 o'clock a.m. Soviet soldiers moved through darkness toward the Oder River. Absolute silence. No engines, no voices. 1 million men holding their breath. Across the river, General Gotthard Heinrici waited. The Germans called him the fireman. He specialized in defensive warfare. He'd predicted exactly where Zhukov would attack. Heinrici had pulled his main forces back from the river, positioned them on the heights above. 3 defensive lines, concrete bunkers, perfect fields of fire. He had perhaps 80,000 men defending. Many were Volkssturm, old men given rifles. Others were Hitler Youth, 14-year-old boys, but they had elevation. At 5 o'clock a.m., the guns opened fire. For 30 minutes, the world ended, then began again in silence. At 5:30 a.m., Zhukov's innovation blazed to life. 143 searchlights, giant anti-aircraft searchlights turned horizontal, pointed at the German lines. The battlefield turned white, not daylight white, chemical white, alien white. For 90 seconds, it worked. German positions stood out like actors on a stage. Then the smoke from the barrage started rising through the light. The fog caught fire, not real fire, light fire. The whole world turned into glowing milk. Soviet infantry advancing across the floodplain couldn't see the ground under their feet. They stumbled, fell into craters, walked into rivers, shot at sounds in the white. German machine gunners positioned 60 meters above the fog watched shadows stumble through the glowing milk below them. Perfect targets. They opened fire. Soviet soldiers fell by the hundreds, then by the thousands. Men screamed orders no one could hear. Officers fired flares that disappeared into the white fog and illuminated nothing. The brilliant innovation had become a killing floor. A Soviet officer would later write in his hidden diary, "The world turned white and we turned blind. We walked on our own dead and couldn't see them." By 7 o'clock a.m., Zhukov knew. He ordered the searchlights turned off. But the damage was done. Thousands of Soviet soldiers lay dead on the floodplain. The infantry was disoriented, pinned down. The advance had stalled completely. The plan that would make Zhukov a legend had just destroyed itself in 90 seconds. He had 2 choices: admit failure and withdraw, or keep attacking until sheer numbers overwhelmed the defenders. Zhukov chose numbers, because retreating meant admitting the searchlights had failed, admitting he'd been wrong, admitting Marshal Konev's quiet skepticism had been right. And from the south came reports that made the choice even clearer. Konev was advancing rapidly. Lighter opposition, Better terrain, no searchlights. The race to Berlin was on, and Zhukov was losing. By noon, Soviet forces had advanced 4 kilometers in 7 hours. The Germans were still fighting. Zhukov's pride would not allow him to stop. The killing would continue for 2 more days. Hour 24. April 17th, 1945. Zhukov stood at his command post, staring at maps that told a story of failure. 24 hours into the offensive, 4 kilometers gained. The plan called for racing to Berlin by now. Instead, his million men were jammed on the western bank of the Oder River, a traffic jam, under German artillery fire. His staff officers stood silent. They'd learned not to speak when Zhukov looked like this. The searchlights had failed catastrophically. The artillery barrage had accomplished nothing. The Germans were still fighting from their positions on the heights. And then the report came that made everything worse. Marshal Konev had advanced 12 kilometers. Against lighter opposition, yes. On easier terrain, yes. But 12 kilometers to Zhukov's 4. Stalin would be watching those numbers. Zhukov picked up the field telephone, started making calls, his voice tight, controlled, angry. More artillery, more infantry, more pressure. But the fundamental problem remained. Soviet forces couldn't break through the German defensive lines, not with conventional tactics, not without unacceptable casualties. Except casualties were becoming acceptable, because pride doesn't calculate cost. At 2:00 p.m., Zhukov made the decision that would define the battle. He ordered his tank armies forward. 1st Guards Tank Army, 2nd Guards Tank Army, the operational reserves, the armored forces he was supposed to save for the breakthrough into Berlin itself. Soviet doctrine was absolute on this point. You commit armored reserves only after infantry creates a breakthrough. There was no breakthrough. The heights were still in German hands. The defensive lines were intact. The roads were clogged with stalled vehicles. Zhukov committed the tanks anyway. His staff exchanged glances. Nobody spoke. This violated everything they'd been trained to believe about operational warfare. But Zhukov wasn't thinking about doctrine. He was thinking about Konev, about Stalin's cold voice on the telephone, about history remembering who took Berlin. The tanks rolled forward, hundreds of T-34s and heavy Stalin tanks pushing through the infantry, crushing supply trucks caught in the traffic jam, driving over Soviet dead still lying in the mud. A tank commander radioed to his superior. "Comrade Colonel, we're driving on our own men." The order came back. Acknowledged. Continue. Advance. The message was relayed up the chain. It reached Zhukov's command post by 3:00 p.m. Zhukov read it, put it aside, issued no new orders. The tanks kept moving. This was the moment. The moment when tactical disaster became human catastrophe. When a failed plan became a grinding attrition battle. When pride overruled every principle of military science. 50 kilometers west, General Heinrici read casualty reports from the heights. His 9th Army was dying, for nothing. The war was already lost. He picked up the phone, called Hitler's headquarters, requested permission to withdraw to better defensive positions closer to Berlin. The voice on the other end was ice. "The 9th Army will hold every meter of ground. No retreat." Heinrici put down the phone, stared at his maps. Both armies, both commanders, both trapped by pride. His soldiers would die on those heights, for orders that made no sense, from a man in a bunker who'd already lost the war. Zhukov's soldiers would die taking those heights, for a race that mattered only to Stalin and his marshals, for a victory parade that was already guaranteed. Pride doesn't calculate only on one side. By evening, Soviet forces had finally captured the 1st defensive line. The Germans fell back to the 2nd line, orderly, disciplined, still fighting. The cost was staggering. Casualties were mounting by the thousands, but Zhukov's tanks were on the heights now. That night, he spoke with his senior commanders, told them the breakthrough would come tomorrow, told them to commit everything, told them Stalin expected results. He didn't mention the casualties, didn't mention the traffic jams, didn't mention that the brilliant searchlight plan had blinded his own army. Because commanders don't admit mistakes in Stalin's Soviet Union. They push forward. They claim success. They bury the truth in the ground with the bodies. Hour 48, April 18th, 1945, dawn. The Germans were still on the heights, and Zhukov was about to face his darkest day. April 18th, 1945, 8 o'clock a.m., hour 50. Something unexpected happened. German armored forces counterattacked from the north. Real tanks. Not old men with rifles. Not teenage boys with grenades. They crashed into the Soviet flank. For 2 hours, the Soviet advance stopped. In some places, units fell back. The reports reached Zhukov's command post. After 2 days of grinding forward, the Germans were pushing back. Zhukov grabbed a phone, started screaming orders. More artillery, more tanks, more men. His staff had never seen him like this. Frantic, almost panicked, because Stalin had called Marshal Konev that morning, given Konev permission to swing north toward Berlin. The race was now official. At 10 o'clock a.m., Zhukov committed everything, every remaining reserve, every artillery piece, every aircraft. Soviet planes bombed positions that barely existed. Soviet artillery fired until barrels glowed red, until guns exploded from overheating. And on the ground, men died. A Soviet platoon attacked a concrete bunker at noon. 40 men that morning. By 1 o'clock p.m., 12 remained. They took the bunker. Inside, they found 6 German defenders. 2 were over 60 years old. 1 was 16. All dead. The platoon's officer sat on the bunker steps. He tried to write in his journal. His hands shook too much. One of his soldiers stood nearby, young, exhausted. He asked the question that had been growing in all their minds. "Comrade Lieutenant, why are we still fighting? The war's already won, isn't it?" The officer looked at him, at the boy's face streaked with dirt and smoke, at the bodies behind them, at the landscape that no longer resembled Earth. He had no answer. Because the answer was pride. And you can't explain pride to a man standing in blood. The soldier nodded, like he'd expected that. He walked away to help dig positions for the night. The officer sat alone on the bunker steps, the question echoing in his head. Why are we still fighting? On the German side, the collapse was coming. The Hitler youth boy, the one who'd fired the Panzerfaust from a basement in Seelow town the day before, had fallen back to a trench north of the town. He was 15 years old. He'd knocked out a Soviet tank yesterday. He'd felt like a soldier then. Today, he felt like a child waiting to die. He crouched in the trench with 4 other boys. They had 1 rifle between them, 8 bullets total. A Soviet T-34 appeared over the ridge. The boys looked at each other. 1 rifle, 8 bullets, 1 tank. They ran. 3 made it to the next trench. 2 didn't. The boy who destroyed a tank with a Panzerfaust now ran from tanks he had no weapon to fight. He would later say that April 18th was the day he stopped believing in anything except survival, stopped believing in victory, stopped believing in Germany, just wanted to live until tomorrow. By 2 o'clock p.m., German resistance was collapsing, not because of Soviet tactics, simply because the Germans had nothing left. General Heinrici ordered what remained of the Ninth Army to fall back toward Berlin. Of 80,000 defenders, perhaps 40,000 could still walk. At exactly 2 o'clock p.m., Zhukov's phone rang. Stalin. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. Stalin's voice was ice. "You have superiority of 10 to 1, and you're still stuck?" Zhukov tried to explain. The heights were falling now. The road to Berlin was opening. "Stop wasting time," Stalin said. The line went dead. Zhukov stood there, phone in hand. He'd won the battle. In 3 days, he'd broken through 3 defensive lines. He'd destroyed an entire German army. But he'd done it by drowning them in Soviet blood. 12,000 dead according to the reports. 30,000 in reality, maybe more. For a ridge of hills 60 meters tall. For 3 days delay. For pride. At 8 o'clock p.m., Soviet forces secured the last German positions on Seelow Heights, 72 hours after the searchlights had turned the battlefield into glowing milk and blinded their own army. The road to Berlin lay open. Hitler, in his bunker 50 kilometers away, had 12 days left to live. The war would end in 3 weeks. But Zhukov had his victory, and that night he began making another decision. He would never admit the searchlights had failed, never acknowledge the real casualties, never confess that pride had cost 30,000 lives. Because victors don't admit mistakes, they bury them. April 21st, 1945, Berlin. Zhukov's forces surrounded the city. The final battle for Nazi Germany's capital began. Marshal Konev's forces arrived from the south. though they'd faced lighter opposition on easier terrain. Both marshals claimed credit for the victory, but Zhukov had reached Berlin. That was what mattered. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe ended. 19 days after Seelow Heights, 30,000 Soviet soldiers had died for those 19 days. 40,000 German soldiers had died for those 19 days, for a battle that changed nothing strategically. But that truth would take 40 years to emerge. In Moscow, the victory parades began. Zhukov rode a white horse through Red Square. Stalin stood on the reviewing platform, the hero of Berlin, the conqueror of the Reich. Nobody mentioned the searchlights. Soviet war correspondents wrote glowing accounts of the Battle of Seelow Heights, the brilliant innovation of the searchlights, the lightning breakthrough. The casualties were listed as 12,000, a modest price for such a triumph. Pravda published photographs of Zhukov inspecting captured German positions, photographs of Soviet tanks on the heights, photographs of victory, no photographs of the floodplain, no photographs of Soviet dead stacked like cordwood waiting for burial details. Those photographs existed. They stayed in the archives for 40 years. Soviet officers who'd been there read these accounts in disbelief. They'd walked on their own dead. They'd stumbled blind through glowing fog. They'd watched 30,000 men die for pride, but they said nothing. Because in Stalin's Soviet Union, contradicting the official history was dangerous, possibly fatal, so they kept their diaries hidden, tucked away in attics, buried in desk drawers, shared only with family and whispers. In 1966, Zhukov published his memoirs, an entire chapter devoted to Seelow Heights. He described the searchlights as revolutionary, a brilliant innovation that blinded the Germans and illuminated targets perfectly. A complete success. Every soldier who'd been there knew he was lying. But Zhukov was a hero of the Soviet Union, a marshal, a legend, and legends don't admit mistakes. The official Soviet history of the Great Patriotic War was published in 1975, 6 volumes, thousands of pages. Seelow Heights was described as a masterpiece of Soviet military art. Zhukov's genius, Stalin's strategy. The casualties remained at 12,000. The searchlights were praised as innovative and effective. For 40 years, this was the truth, the only truth allowed. Then, in 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev came to power. Glasnost began. The archives started to open. Soviet veterans, now old men, finally published their diaries. The real casualty figures emerged, 30,000, maybe more. The searchlight failure was acknowledged. They'd blinded Soviet troops, created chaos, turned innovation into catastrophe. In 1991, after the Soviet Union collapsed, the museum at Seelow Heights added a new placard next to the searchlight display. It told the truth. By then, Zhukov had been dead for 17 years. He never admitted the searchlights had failed, never acknowledged the real cost. He took the lie to his grave, because that's what victors do. Seelow Heights, Germany, today. The museum stands on the ridge where 30,000 Soviet soldiers died, where 40,000 German soldiers died, for pride, for politics, for a war that would end in 3 weeks. Tourists walk through the exhibits. They see photographs of the victory parade, maps showing the brilliant Soviet breakthrough. Zhukov on his white horse. Then they reach the searchlight, massive, industrial, a relic from April 1945. Next to it, that small placard, added after the Soviet Union collapsed, after the truth could finally be told. The searchlights blinded Soviet troops. They reflected off smoke and dust. The plan failed. 40 years of lies, summarized in 3 sentences. The soldiers who fought here tried to tell the truth, but the soldiers didn't write the history books. The victors did. And victors bury their mistakes, in mass graves, in falsified reports, in memoirs that lie, in official histories that celebrate catastrophes as genius. The searchlight still stands, not as a monument to innovation, as a monument to the lies we tell ourselves when we win. Because institutional pride turns tactical victory into human catastrophe, and the winners spend decades hiding the truth until someone finally adds a placard, and the dead get to be remembered honestly. 30,000 Soviet soldiers, 40,000 German soldiers. They deserved better than to die for a lie. They deserved better than to be lied about for 40 years. The searchlight stands in the museum, a monument to brilliant ideas that failed and to the truth that finally came home. This is the War Maestro Chronicles, buried mistakes, rewritten victories, the truths that took decades to surface. History remembers Zhukov as the hero of Berlin. We remember the searchlights that blinded 30,000 of his own men. We remember the diaries hidden for 40 years. We remember the placard added in 1991 that finally told the truth. The greatest victories aren't always the ones worth celebrating. Sometimes they're the ones built on lies. If you want more stories the victors tried to bury, subscribe. Your support keeps the truth from being forgotten. Thanks for watching.